Welcome to my series, The Probabilistic Model of Providence, or PMP for short. I want to address this quick. I wore a Bucknell shirt, that's my alma mater, in the last video to make a point, but I realized that I don't show my alma mater enough love in these, so I'm wearing another shirt, Ray Bucknell. And to kick off this lecture, I was halfway through a take 10 seconds ago, and I have this stopwatch that beeps like once every 30 days for whatever reason. I can't get it to stop beeping. I've tried everything and it just happened to beep in the middle of the take, and that is the perfect segue into our discussion of ordered timing. It's one of the principles of PMP. With ordered timing, I'm making the case that it is not the actions that take place in the natural world that are ordained, or at least not all of them. It is the timing of these events that are ordained. And this becomes relevant when we talk about the problem of determinism and evil. Because how can we live in a just and merciful universe where evil does regularly occur? And I'm going to make the argument that it is the timing of these things that is set. The actions are a consequence of humans choosing freely, but the timing is something that is calibrated in our bounded reality. Well, we are going to go to the scriptures, and I bet you guys can guess where we are going to go. We're going to Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build. And this goes on for quite some time, ironically. So how can events be ordered in time without being the result of an episodic intervention that makes the event likely at that time, or not be a result of determinism wherein every event is divinely controlled? I'm going to introduce our first model. Let's say that this model shows that within a bounded period of time, an event is possible. Well, I'm going to use the example of you dropping your toothbrush first thing in the morning while you're getting ready. And this drop of the toothbrush, something as insignificant as that can set off a nonlinear providential cascade, wherein you drop the toothbrush, you're 5 minutes late to work, or you're 5 minutes late leaving in the morning, and this disrupts the traffic pattern, so somebody else is late, and this person is on thin ice at their job, so they get written up, and then this causes them to be in a bad mood, and they lash out at their kid, who's so upset the next day he gets a bad grade at a test in school, and this nonlinear cascade goes on in a manner that appears deterministic. So that would suggest that the exact moment when the toothbrush is dropped appears deterministic. But we are going to square this circle. That was the clock again beeping. I have no idea why it's doing that today. But let's say every day you have a 2% likelihood of dropping that toothbrush. Every day, 2%. Let's say this is a year. And you're going through your year always with that small chance because you wake up groggy in the morning. But it doesn't happen until it happens. So on that day it happens, on that day that it causes that nonlinear cascade, we might assume that the action is deterministic or episodic intervention, that you had to drop it on that day in order for this cascade to transpire. What I'm suggesting is that the reason this isn't deterministic is because there's an equal range on every single day that it happens at the same probability. So nothing had to happen to make you drop it on that day. It was possible that you could, and that happened to be the day that you did. And we can take this model and we can apply it to any event in life. The likelihood of a car accident, the likelihood of a breakup, the likelihood of getting a new job, the likelihood of winning the lottery. It's possible within this bounded range. So the time that it actually happens isn't deterministic. It was just possible and a given percentage likely that it eventually did happen. But this model doesn't fully answer the question, because as we all know, on some days, events are more likely than on other days. So I'm going to introduce our second model. Quick story. I got in trouble at work about a month or so ago. And I was very upset by this because I try and walk the straight and narrow, get everything done on time, get all my details right. Oh, this was very frustrating to me. What I didn't know is that this was a department-wide thing. So there were multiple people who got in trouble on the same day that I did. And what would have seemed inevitable based off of a broader knowledge of the situation seemed impossible to me because I didn't have all the information. So there's two things there. Let's start here. So we take any given event and we can assign it on a range of likelihoods. So I'm going to go with 5, 5, and 90. Any given event is most likely to happen at a certain time. And there's a difference between local and global certainty. So if we take my work example, from a local perspective, I had no knowledge of this change in likelihood because it seemed like every day would have been a 5% likely day that I'd get in trouble because I walked the straight and narrow. But globally, if I had a full knowledge of all matters in the situation, I would have seen that this is inherently likely. And this is where my modeling begins to surpass my ability to mathematically imagine the reality of the scenario that I am creating or that I'm describing. Because every event that transpires in reality is most likely at a given time as opposed to other times. But we know that things happen at a certain time, and we know that locally we don't have full knowledge about what will happen at what time, but globally speaking, reality is ordered, so there is some knowledge beyond what we can currently see that makes it most likely that things happen when they do, that goes beyond determinism, because every action that can conceivably happen is a result of free choice. So the free choice adds up to make, there it goes again, to make these mathematics incredibly likely at a certain time that we can't perceive. And I'm going to harken back to a story I told in my first lecture on this series, The Confessions of a Former Determinist. And in that lecture, I presented the case of my college ex-girlfriend. I gave her a How I Met Your Mother name. I called her Stella. So when I met Stella, it's the most statistically unlikely event that's ever happened to me in my entire life. It was at a foreign place. It was at a very specific time. And what I identified was that if I went down and went through the details and the numbers of how that meeting actually transpired, there were at least 19 different factors that all calibrate in an instant to make that meeting possible and that decision to date possible. Oh, now this is where the model really takes off. Because if there's so many factors going in to making every decision that are all most likely at a certain point that lead us to the reality that we see an event transpire on a particular day, at a particular time, in a particular place. I mean, I could extend this upward if I had a bigger whiteboard, and I could give you every single factor that perfectly aligned, that was very unlikely over here, and very unlikely over here, that all calibrated and landed on the perfect day where we could meet. And this is where the model surpasses my ability to mathematically comprehend. Imagine that everything in reality is on a trajectory wherein the specific actions are all acquiring individual likelihoods that create points of convergence that are locally not understood but are globally understood to make the events that transpire in our life seemingly certain, but it's always 99, it's never 100, but seemingly certain to enable this reality that we have at our disposal, that we live in every day. I think that is just almost incomprehensible of a mathematical claim. But I think with that idea, with applying that idea, understanding that idea, we can begin to get a sense of how divine governance works probabilistically. I hope you enjoyed going on this journey with me. Thank you, and God bless.